You are not the one who owns your DNA. And if you don't own your DNA, then surely nobody else should be able to own your DNA, let alone patent it, right? The United States disagrees. Due to a misunderstanding of the science involved, they issued thousands of patents on human DNA. Does that mean one day you might run into your own clone?
No, but that doesn't mean that there still are not problems that are associated with this issue. Because of the complexity of the topic, it has both scientific and philosophical components. Hi, my name is Taylor Burke, and I am a sophomore biochemistry major at Creighton University.
I'm Shannon and I study philosophy. This summer, Taylor and I began researching a company called Myriad Genetics and their Supreme Court case about the validity of human DNA patents. We were surprised that this was even a question. Though this was a landmark case in the practice of human DNA patenting, the Supreme Court did not fully address many of the issues associated with human DNA ownership, which need to be governed by laws with a clear answer to the question, who owns your DNA?
Now, I would like to just take a quick poll of the room. Please raise your hand if you either know somebody who has had breast cancer or you have had breast cancer yourself. Yeah, that's pretty typical. So I would like to introduce you to a company known as Myriad Genetics. Myriad Genetics is based in Utah, and they were the first company to discover and subsequently patent two breast cancer genes known as BRCA1 and BRCA2. They also offered genetic testing for this particular diseases. Now, you can think of them as almost like Ancestry.com, but instead of looking into your familial history, they looked at your ability to have a susceptibility to these types of diseases. Now, they also patented these genes, which means that they owned the right to all of the testing for them, which means they could charge up to $3,000 for this information.
This practice was not uncommon. From the time this technology developed in the 1970s, thousands of patents on human DNA, specifically isolated DNA, existed. Myriad Genetics was sued by the ACLU in a case that eventually ended up in the Supreme Court. This is obviously a really significant issue, especially when it concerns your DNA. As Myriad says on its own website, nothing is more important than an individual's DNA fingerprint. Myriad Genetics argued that by isolating human DNA, they were making it different, fundamentally different than what occurs in your body. The ACLU argued that it was not fundamentally different from your body and does not fulfill all of the requirements, something needs to be patented. They also argued that these patents stop research and harm patients. A patent is a unique form of ownership that sets up a fence around a particular invention. They stop others from using and selling it. The purpose is to incentivize without hindering research, creativity, and discovery. Certain things are not patentable, such as laws of nature, natural phenomena, and abstract ideas. Though there have been life forms that have been patented if humans fundamentally change them, such as with genetic engineering. In addition, there are three other patent conditions. It must be novel or new, meaning that it involves some sort of human manufacture and nothing else like it exists. It also cannot be obvious, meaning that an average person in the relevant field can't think of the invention as being obvious. The final condition is it must have utility. It must serve some sort of purpose. For example, the mustache guard by V.A. Gates is a patentable invention. It is not a law of nature, it is not a natural phenomena, and it is not an abstract idea. It is certainly novel, and the average person with a mustache probably wouldn't have thought of this particular invention. Its purpose is to protect the mustache from getting dirty when you eat food. So, is isolated DNA, like the mustache guard, something that can be patented? To answer this question, we need a clear definition of what DNA is and understand what it means to isolate DNA.
DNA is a fascinating molecule. It contains all of the information that makes you, you. It contains the information for what color your skin is going to be, to the color of your eyes, to whether or not broccoli tastes good or not. one of the most interesting things about DNA is you can think of it almost like a blueprint that has all of this knowledge. But it's just that, it's a blueprint. How does this information become something tangible like pigment in the skin? Well, molecular biologists have given the name at which DNA becomes something tangible a process called the central dogma of biology. You can think of the first step, the actual DNA molecule, as a blueprint that is an electronic copy for something, let's say a car. All of the information about this car is kept in this blueprint. What the dimensions of the car are, what type of metal you need to make it, what color it is, etc. But if having all of this information in one place is not necessarily the most useful way to have it. So it is transcripted into RNA. RNA has many uses, but one of which is it acts as a working copy as DNA. So in the previous example, let's say that you want to specifically build the engine first. So you print out a paper copy of the engine. This paper copy would be equivalent to the RNA. Meanwhile, the engine that you build would be the actual protein. Now, we've been representing DNA as this small molecule, but that is far from what is actually the case. First and foremost, DNA can be more represented like this. It is a massive molecule. If you were to take all of the strands of DNA and put them end to end and unwrap them from their proteins, it would be about this long. So this poses a problem for companies like Myriad Genetics, where you are only interested in only a certain section of that DNA. Let's say this section. So you must go through a process called DNA isolation. So the isolated DNA, in the case of Myriad Genetics, was those breast cancer genes. And the isolated DNA and the information it contains can be thought of like a sentence. The sentence being, a car driving down the highway goes at this speed. That sentence has the same information regardless if it's alone or whether it's in the context of a book. And this was and likewise, isolated DNA has the same information whether it's by itself or within the context of a natural DNA molecule. This was the fundamental misunderstanding that Myriad Genetics was able to use in order to get a patent on the breast cancer genes. So, like with any misunderstanding, problems arise. First and foremost, it obstructed research. An MIT study showed that 1 in 10 research projects were dropped because of DNA patents. Now, this doesn't necessarily matter if the research is into something like the mustache guard. Mustache guards aren't critical to human life. But for people suffering from cancer, these types of setbacks in research can literally cause the waits for new drugs, new types of treatments to be extended by months. And that's time that those people do not have. Secondly, it prevents competitive pricing. Companies like Myriad Genetics effectively have a monopoly on anything related to the gene. That includes genetic testing. They were the only company that was able to have the permission to provide genetic tests for this. So they were able to charge $3,000 for it. And some of that money went back into learning more about the breast cancer genes, but also that money was used in order to pursue the company. And thirdly, it prevented you from accessing your own information. They owned the patent to those genes. If you were to go into a doctor's office and request a genetic test, they would not be able to tell you if you had those genes without the express permission of Myriad Genetics. The only way you could gain access to this information is if you paid for it. So therefore, the ACLU had an issue with all of the problems that arose from DNA ownership. So, the case was eventually brought to the Supreme Court, which decided in a 9-0 vote that because isolated DNA and natural DNA were the same thing, and it was a naturally occurring phenomenon, that Myriad Genetics could not own this type of DNA. And therefore, if companies don't own your DNA anymore, who does?
We're not really sure. At this point, a better question would be who should own your DNA. To answer this, we need to distinguish between something called type and token. Think of type like the model of car you drive. You may say that many people drive the same car as you, but what you really mean is many people drive the same type of car as you. The actual car you own the title of, that's the token, a specific instance of the type. For genes, the kinds of human DNA, such as the cancer genes, are the type that many people have. And the specific information in a specific body is the token. So who should own your DNA? We think that for the DNA type, humanity should own it. For the car, it would make sense for the company to own it because they invented the model. But nobody invented human DNA. Myriad didn't invent the cancer genes, they just found them. For the DNA token, your unique DNA token, you should have that information. It's your information and it's going to affect you. Nobody should be able to use or take it from you without your permission. Hopefully in the future we will see more laws regarding who owns your DNA, but for now the best we have is this Supreme Court case with Myriad Genetics.
And the Supreme Court case answered a lot of these questions of who owns your DNA, but it did not answer the question entirely. Therefore, while you may not exactly find a clone of yourself walking down the street, you don't exactly have the right to what makes you, you either. Thank you for your time.